Home Trails podcast presented by me, Ultra Running Sam. Now, this podcast is part of the Home Trails media entity that encompasses our Home Trails documentaries. You may have seen them on YouTube, so where we interview famous ultra runners from around the world and in the UK at the moment. We film them on the trail and in the home, obviously, Home Trails. Get those insights into their training, big races they've done, and then just their background information. Try and dig a bit deeper into what motivates them to go and do these amazing things that they do. Also, part of Home Trails is new for this year is our live podcast coming from big races. You may have seen us at the Spine Race in January. We were there doing our thing all week. Later on in the summer, we will be at the Lap in the Lake District, and then keep your eyes peeled for other races where we'll be popping up and doing media coverage for some big races, hopefully. So, obviously, we have a podcast now, so we'll keep doing this every week. Keep churning out the podcasts with famous runners and people in the industry, anyone that we can get on that we feel that you might be interested in related to trail running and ultra running. So on with our guest. Okay, welcome to the Home Trails podcast with me, Ultra Running Sam. So this week we've got a solo episode, so apologies you stuck with me. So the interview I've got planned hasn't worked out, but I thought I just want to keep the streak of trying to do an episode every week going, and I'm going to be away with the kids because it's the school holidays next week. So you've got me solo for what we'll do is we'll do an ultra news episode, so just sort of catch you up on what's been happening in the ultra running world. So before you tune out, this is what we're going to talk about. So we're going to talk about Northern Traverse and what happened there with the men's and women's field. We're going to talk about Western States happening in June. We're going to talk about, on the same similar subject, Unbreakable 2 and what's happening with that. We're going to go into the Arizona Monster 300 controversy that you may have seen all over Reddit and all over social media. And we'll talk about how people did at that race as well, and some people that you may be familiar with, and then we'll finish off by just chatting about PB137, which was my race last weekend. So if you're not bothered about my running, you can tune out at the end. But we'll dive into the news. So yeah, Northern Traverse. So obviously there's multiple races all happening at the same time, the Moors Traverse, Dales Traverse, and obviously the Northern Traverse, which is the longest, which is the coast to coast essentially, 300 kilometers. So my maths is correct, that's about 180 miles of epic terrain to run across. So obviously Damien Hall, you may have seen Damien Hall set a new course record. So he ran strong all the way from the start, and led the field. As far as I know, yeah, I think he just led from the start. And he took down Kim Collison's record. So I'm just going to have a look at. I did have. Where are we? So I'll have a look at the made a note. So okay, so the podium at the Northern Traverse was Damien Hall in first. He came in 42:56:50, and that's a new course record. So he basically knocked like an hour and a half off Kim Collison's record from 2022. So that was 44:24 bang on. So he knocked, yeah, quite a bit of time off that. Second was James Chapman in 47:29. Then third, David Hanna in 52:07:13. So I'm sure Damien will be chuffed, especially since it's Kim that he's taken down his record from 2022. So I know obviously Damo's like shifted his attention away from the spine for a little bit, and we'll see what he gets up to. So some great running from Damien. The women's field. So first we had Fiona Horsfield. She came in 54 hours, 12 minutes, 21 seconds. And then in second was Leanne Van Dyke in 59, 53, 35. And then in third was friend of the show, Laura Swanton Rouvlin in 61, 27, 05. Now, I did have a bit of information about, yeah, so Leanne, who came in second, she knocked off 14 hours from a time from last year. So in 2024, she was an extra 14 hours. So she, whatever she's been doing in the last year, she's done really well to knock 14 hours. Maybe she just had a bad day last year, or maybe she just had a great year of training and learn from her mistakes last year. So some great running from her. Fiona, who came first. So we've got Fiona coming on the podcast. So um, we'll try and make that happen in the next week or so. I'm going to be away camping with the kids for the school holidays. So this nice sunny weather that we're having. So hopefully it will stick around and maybe it'll be okay. We are in a caravan, so we'll be okay either way. So even if it's raining, it's getting away. Um, awesome. So that was the Northern Traverse. So everyone's done really, really well there. So moving on to Western States then. So obviously we interviewed Fiona Pascal a couple of weeks ago after Chianti, and she was given a golden ticket to Western States. Now, at the time, she was a bit cagey about her decision on what she was going to do, whether she was going to take the ticket or not, and whether logistically it would work for her. But obviously, since then, she has announced that she is going to Western States, so that is great. So I know, try not to sort of, whenever I interview her, I try not to sort of talk about Beth, her sister, too much because I'm aware that she probably doesn't want to sort of be compared to a sister, that she's a runner in her own right. But she does sort of acknowledge that it was, it was definitely sort of her inspiration that got her into ultra running anyway. So she's got a lot to thank her sister for. But as far as like sort of me trying to encourage her to go to Western States, I didn't want to sort of say you've got to go because your sister won the race. I think that's probably like a bit too much pressure for her. So at the time, we sort of, it was kind of left in the air as whether she was going. But then obviously since then, she's decided that it is sort of it's a chance that, not that it's a chance that won't come around again, but rather it's a chance that she has to take it while it's there, and she'd probably regret it if she didn't take that chance to go there. And obviously, while we're on the subject of Western States, you may have seen that Journey Film and Free Trail are getting their heads together to do an Unbreakable too. So if you're not familiar, I'm assuming you are familiar if you're listening to this podcast, that back in 2010, Journey Film made a documentary about Western States. It's on YouTube. Go and watch it if you haven't seen it already. Unbreakable. The soundtrack's great. It always makes me a bit emotional when I watch it, and I don't know why. I think it's the music, because I think the music is used in other films. I think it's used in Interstellar, and this is probably a bit too much information, but that's the film that makes me bawl like a baby. But they use the same film, M83, the same song from M83, um, and it really like gets you revved up for Western States. Now I don't know whether this is sort of, I'm assuming this is probably like Debo and Ryan Thrower from Free Trail sort of giving him a bit of a nudge to sort of say, because I don't think JB Benner, who did the original Unbreakable film, I don't think he's done anything since in that kind of regard. He just kind of made Unbreakable and just sort of put it out there. We released it, and then eventually he put it on YouTube for free. So you can go on YouTube and watch it, and it's got millions of views. It's like one of the most popular ultra running documentaries that's out there. So if you haven't seen it, go and watch it. So I spoke to Ryan Thrower this week about Free Trail's involvement, and Ryan was sort of a little bit unsure about what was going to actually happen. He said that they'd sort of obviously got this idea. It seems like a logical time to do it because it's 15 years since Unbreakable one. Um, and all of those, obviously, all those guys that were in that original film. The only one that's actually, well, no, actually, Anton Kopicka, he's back ultra running, and I think he's doing UTMB this year, as far as I know. Um, Obviously, you've got Killian who is coming back, and there's obviously, if you've been following that story of golden tickets and Killian going to Chianti just to get his golden ticket so that he can get back into Western States. So I think everybody's sort of jumped on this and thought this would be like an ideal opportunity to sort of not redo Unbreakable, but um, make Unbreakable 2, basically. So you've got all these guys that are lining up, and when you look at who's going to be on the sort of start line, it's basically a who's who of ultra running. You've got the best of the best that are going to be there. Obviously, Jim is going to be back. You've got Killian going. You've got David Roach. There's obviously a lot of hype about his year and how he's focusing on Western States. You've got all of the super fast US runners that are all going back to try and make something special happen this year, and everybody's predicting that it's going to be the fastest Western States in history, which it could possibly be, but things don't always turn out that way. And maybe if Mother Nature has a hand in things and decides that it's going to be a hot year, then maybe not. Maybe it won't be the fastest year, but definitely it's going to be, as far as like competition is concerned, the best of the best are going to be there, and it's going to be sort of one to watch. So talking to Ryan, he sort of said, I said, what are the plans for making the film? Is everything sort of set up? How is it going to work? What involvement of the free trail had? And he just said basically it's still sort of in the planning stages, and he wasn't 100% sure that it was going to happen. But I think because it's been sort of put out there into the ether, then I don't think that they've really got a choice in what happens. I think it's basically it'll, if they don't make the film, then enough people will probably film parts of the race that you could probably crowdsource all of the footage and make a documentary yourself if you needed to make it happen. So I'm sure that is going to happen. So I think he's probably just being a bit cagey at the minute because they haven't made a definite plan of how they're going to attack it, and maybe they've not had a meeting. So I asked Ryan to come on the podcast to talk about it, and he says that he hasn't got anything to say about it yet because they're still at the point of planning. I've reached out to JB Benner at Journey Film. I've not heard anything back, but he hasn't seen the Instagram messages. I've sent him an email, so I'll see what happens if he sort of picks that email up. If he doesn't, then I'll find another way of hassling him, because I'd like to get him on the podcast anyway, just to tell the story of Unbreakable and then talk about Unbreakable too. So maybe he's being quiet because for the same reason that Ryan Thrower and Free Trail are being quiet about it, that it's an idea, but nobody's made any firm plans about it yet. But it'd be great, wouldn't it, if it actually happens? That will be great. Yeah, just gonna have a sip of drink. It's hard doing a solo podcast. You have to do all the talking, don't you? There we go. Right, we move on then from Western States to another US race, the Arizona Monster 300, and the controversy that surrounds this race. So, if you're familiar with Candice Burt and Destination Trail races, obviously she puts on like Moab 240 and is it Tahoe 200. So she is in that world of the super long ultra races. And obviously the trend now is like hundreds are, just by the by, you do 100. 200s and 300s are now the new thing that everybody wants to do. So this was a new race that was put on. So everyone was saying it was a bit cheeky that she sort of snuck it in just before everyone was going to do Cocodona to try and steal people away from Cocodona. But I think that race was full anyway. So people that wanted to do Cocodona, which is in May, had the opportunity to go and do the Arizona 300. So the controversy around it started a few weeks ago, which I initially I thought it was just an April Fool's joke, and it was a way of sort of getting a bit of publicity or some marketing that they were doing for the race. So there was like a very public spat between Candice and a guy who was part of the going to be part of the media team. So there was like a very public argument between them, posts on Reddit and on Instagram about him not being paid for equipment, having him deciding to walk away from the race. So he was going to be potentially live streaming the whole race. And they basically had a big, massive fight. He called her a narcissist and said that she was impossible to deal with, which seems to be, I mean, I don't know Candice, I've heard her interviewed a few times. I don't know what she's like, but the impression that we seem to be getting from these subreddits that are out there, is that she's very difficult to deal with, and there's some crazy stuff that's gone on at races. So um, there was a guy that posted, I suppose, semi-anonymously on Reddit about him being an aid station captain and the kind of situation that he was in as an aid station captain. So I'll read you what he's put on Reddit and see what you think. So it's entitled, "I was an aid station captain at Arizona Monster this weekend." So I was an aid station captain at AZ Monster this weekend for one of the earlier aid stations. My first time volunteering with Destination Trails. I could say most of what you're hearing, reading is true. First of all, I've always been meh on Candice's behaviour. Not for me, but I've never met her or interacted with her. However, starting a very public internet battle the week of your race is just wild, unprofessional, and no doubt contributed to our lack of volunteers. However, I still wanted to take the don't knock it till you try it approach and see how things were myself. For the record, I decided to volunteer because I am passionate about helping athletes achieve amazing things. My fellow volunteers were some of the best I have worked with. I have years of experience working professional sporting events and other ultramarathons. Destination Trails itself is way out of whack. As aid station captain, they expected me to clean up after the runners pooping and peeing into a bucket, which was among the worst of all the responsibilities that were above my pay grade, which was $0 as a volunteer. We had no-show volunteers day of, skeleton crew, broken equipment, inadequate chairs, blankets, tents. Nearly ran out of coke and water, but my team managed to run to get supplies from the nearest town to prevent that. I had runners sitting and sleeping on the ground in the middle of the night. My volunteers maybe got 2 hours of sleep in 26 hours of official aid station operations. I got zero sleep. Ham radio guys were understaffed and overworked. We busted our asses, all for the love of our community. Overall, all ended well with my aid station, but goddamn, never again. Goddamn, never again. I'm assuming it's American. Needless to say, what she is doing is negligent and will eventually catch up to her. She needs to hire actual staff to do a lot of these jobs to ensure best possible outcomes for all. I just hope it isn't a runner or volunteer who suffers the major consequences first. No doubt it will be. I am deeply fearful of that. Again, much love to all my fellow volunteers and the runners who were there and out there. Y'all are the only thing that made this a great experience for me. We should all be thinking of them and wishing them lots of luck and safety. So it seems that everybody seems to have this impression of her that the race has been doing sort of things unprofessionally, not having the equipment needed for aid stations, not having the supplies that they need, those kind of things. And then if you follow your boy Scott Jurek on Instagram, you'll notice all the memes that he's been putting out about the bucket. So I've seen pictures, and supposedly it is true that instead of toilets at the aid stations, they were just basically giant buckets with lids on. Now, you can kind of go two ways with this. So if you're used to like big events where there are facilities put on, um, you can understand people complaining a little bit about conditions. But from my experience of ultras and from sort of general running, trail running anyway, if you've got to go, you've got to go. And if you've got the choice of going in a bucket behind a screen or in a tent or something, or going in, going on the side of the trail, then maybe going in the bucket is kind of the more on the luxury end of things. I don't know. Um, I'm not sure what you feel. Send me a message and tell me what you think about whether that is a bit over the top that people are complaining about having to poop into a bucket. Because, when you're on a long trail, certainly when I've been on long ultras, obviously, if you're playing spine bingo, I mentioned the spine race. Um, if you've got to go, you've got to go. And most of the time on races like that, you're nowhere near a toilet. So when you're actually in an aid station and you've got an actual physical real toilet, it's a bit of a luxury. So pooping at the side of the trail and using your poo shovel can be just the thing that you have to do. So not sure whether whether it'll be anything that people really complain about. I think maybe there's a bit of bad feeling towards Candice, and maybe it's coming out in that way. And yeah, but anyway, talk. We'll skip the negative stuff. We'll stop talking about the negative stuff about the race. The great things came from this race. So PJ Mortimer won. Now I know he's like he runs for Pravia, doesn't he? Um, in the US, and he came over and was second place in the summer spine a couple of summers ago. He's into his long trails, and I think he did Cocodona the year before. And then, interestingly, somebody who's just seems to have just appeared from nowhere. Um, Cameron Haynes's brother, called Taylor Spike, just came second. So I didn't even know that he'd got a brother that ran, but basically he's come and just appeared out of nowhere, Taylor Spike, and came second. Not sure on times. And then interestingly, which a name that popped up and I saw it and obviously was a familiar name, and I didn't realize he was going out there, is Ian Keith. So obviously, if you listen to this podcast, you'll know that Ian's been on the podcast before, and I think he still holds the record for the most spine race wins. Certainly before it got like super, super fast and competitive in the last few years, he held the record for a while. So Ian Keith was over there, and I think he seemed to be doing well towards the middle part of the race, but then tailed off and came in 11th. And just ahead of him was another Brit, Scott Jenkins. So I interviewed Scott about his sort of US running obsession that he's got. So he moved from the UK out to the US. I can't quite remember where he lives, but he moved out there last year, and he's thrown himself into doing all of these long course uh, races out there. So for him, this is sort of all part and parcel of what he does out there. So I'm hoping to get either Ian or certainly get Scott Jenkins back on the podcast to talk about his experience of the Arizona Monster 300. So he came in 10th, so a top 10 position for him. So I'm sure he was pleased with that result on a long race. So 300 miler. So 300 milers, maybe they're the new 100 miler. Not sure. But anyway, that clears that up. I'll have another drink. Okay, and then finally, just thought I'd update you for anyone that was interested about my racing outing. So I'd kind of kept it quiet over the last few weeks because originally I was going to do the PB270, which is Ranger Ultras, the long course race, so 270K. on the Pennine Bridleway, and then things happened with things happened, and it became impossible for me to do it. So I decided I was going to do a shorter race, and I was going to do the PB55, which is one of Stu's shorter races in the Peak District, and one that I'd sort of got a good grasp of. I think originally, I think I'm not sure if I held the course record for that route before it changed, or was that one of the other races? But it was a race that I wanted to go back to do, even though it was a slightly different route. And I trained really well, put in a really good training block for doing a 50k, and I was ready. And then, as you know, if you've listened to the podcasts before, I rolled my ankle, and then the same week came down with some kind of weird virus that basically wiped me out. So tonsils were all sort of inflamed and swollen, and glands were swollen up, and just felt really crappy for the week. So that was like in the last few weeks before the race. So I thought it would have been, and maybe I was still feeling rough on the day of the race, and I thought, I could do it, I could get through it. It might make me more poorly, or I might be all right, but then it wouldn't be the performance that I'd sort of trained for, because I knew that I was feeling good and feeling fresh, and I was going to put in a decent turn. So with that out of the question, I was kind of feeling sorry for myself, gave it another week, and sort of sprang back into health and felt really good, and thought, right, okay, I'm going to look for another race. And I was looking around trying to find something that would fit, and nothing would fit with holidays and whatnot, and going away. And then I thought, is it out of the realms of possibility that I could do the shorter route of the original race that I was going to do, which was the two races, the PB270 and PB137? And I thought, 137k, I've trained for a 50k, what could possibly go wrong? So decided to have a word with Stu, even though it was very last minute, and Stu let me into the race, and I basically got up to Hebden Bridge on last Wednesday night, got all my gear with me, went through kit check and everything, had some food, and the start was Thursday morning in Hebden Bridge. So the route goes for that part of the route, that race goes from Hebden Bridge to Settle, and then finishes in Kirkby Stevens for the end of the race. So that's that section of the Pennine Bridleway. So yeah, so I was sort of questioning my decisions, sleeping in my sleeping bag on the Wednesday night in the bunkhouse at Hebden Hay bunkhouse. Um, but the race went okay. So set off from Hebden 8 o'clock on Thursday morning. There was a group, quite a few people had were no shows, didn't turn up for the race. So in the end, I think there was probably only about 9 or 10 of us out of the field that should have been about 15 or something. So there was a smaller crew of people racing. And at the start, I can't remember his name, whoever started the race sort of said, right, if you're going for a position, then you'll probably be running up this hill, and this will sort out the who's going for it and who's not, basically. So I was thinking, well, I'll put in a shift and see how we do. So we set off up the hill, and if you've been to Hebden Hay before, you realise that how steep that path is in and out. So obviously there's the road going in and out, but you don't go anywhere near that. You go up the path that goes up onto the main road, and that's where people join either the Pennine Way or the Pennine Bridleway, go off in two different sort of directions. And yeah, from the start there was a guy in front of me, Michael, I can't remember his last name now. Hi Michael, if you're listening. He said he listens to the podcast. Apologies for not getting you for remembering your last name. He set off at sort of a cracking pace, and I thought, I'll try and stay with him for a bit. I've not really trained for this kind of distance, but we'll see what the legs have got. And I kind of stayed with him, and we ended up chatting. And I think I stayed with him for probably about 6 hours, something like that. And then he was pushing on the hills a little bit, and I just sort of felt that um, I couldn't quite keep the pace that he wanted to keep. So I thought it was rather than me slow him down, I just sort of confessed that we were going a bit too quick and that I was starting to fade a little bit. So I wanted to sort of hang back. So I let him go and off he went. And he says, "Oh, maybe I'll see you later." And I thought, no, no. If you go, you go. I don't think I'll be seeing you again. But he still promised to sort of wait for me at the end and give me a lift home because he's from Codner, so not a million miles away from where I live on the other side of Derby, so that made sense. And he did wait for me at the end as well. But basically, he set off at like a rip roaring pace, and he did great. He set a new course record, knocked it down from like nearly 24 hours down to 22 hours and change. So he set out to do and achieved what he set out to do. So fair play. I came in around 26 hours, but it was as is the case with all ultras. It goes well until it's going well until it's not going well. Um, so what happened was, feeling pretty strong. So once I'd let Michael go, I sort of slowed down to my pace, which was just a bit slower than we were running, and I felt really good. I managed to sort of recoup a bit of energy, and felt like I could sort of run all day at that pace. Started to warm up, got really really warm. Um, had to stop to sort of restock with water. So although there are the big checkpoints and water stops in between the big checkpoints, the sort of ethos of the race is sort of not self-supported, but self-sufficient, I think is the way that they term it. So you kind of expected to, if you can get supplies on the way, then if you need it, and because it was warm, there was a couple of times where I basically asked members of the public for a bit of water. So the good thing about the Pennine Bridleway is it seems to, although it does sort of skirt towns and cities, it just sort of there's a bit of quite a few road crossings um, with more sort of houses on, even though it's kind of a similar elevation gain and loss as the Pennine Way for that section. There's a lot more sort of civilization. So if you need like a get out clause, or if you need to, try and get supplies, you're never a million miles away from people. So on the route, there was quite a few times where, because it was the middle of the day, somebody was sort of coming out of their house, coming out of a cottage on a nice um, country lane, just sort of where they'd join the paths up on a road crossing, and I just sort of cheekily said, I'm doing a race and I've run out of water. Would you do me a favor and fill my water bottles up? So managed to do that a couple of times, and that actually worked. So that's a bit of a tip for you. If you do this race and it's warm, don't expect unless you're going to carry like the full 3 liters that you have to have the capacity to carry, um, which is a lot of water to carry. Then think about sort of where you can get water from, and there are official places where in between the big checkpoints there are like a water stop. But it was just basically a volunteer with a van and a dog and a water supply, so a big sort of container of water that you could fill your water bottles up from. So no, there's no drinks, there's no food, no snacks or anything. You have to carry everything yourself. So that worked. So that was one of the things I was worried about, was that would there be options for sort of topping water up and getting food if you needed it. But food was fine because I've just got my big spine pack on and I carried everything that I needed. So I've got loads of supplies of food. It was just purely just fluid. So if you're going to do the race, take that into consideration. Either fill your bladder with 2 liters of water and then have to carry it, or just be cheeky and ask people if you can fill your water bottles up from taps as you go along the course. So anyway, It was all going really well. Got to settle sort of at tea time. Knew that the temperature was going to drop a bit, but I wasn't sure how much it was going to drop. So I changed from my shorts into my tights and put on switched over to my Merrells. Just not that there was any reason for that other than sort of hot spots on my feet. So I did the first section in my Ultras, and because they've got the roomy toe boxes, they're great and comfortable, but sometimes your feet can move a bit too much, and you can end up getting hot spots on your feet. So I was aware that sort of the front of my foot behind my toes was starting to warm up. So when I got to settle, I whipped them off and I taped up the front of my foot, so the sort of the ball of my foot, yeah, not your heel, the ball of your foot. And then swapped over into my Merrells that are a bit narrower, but then they're not a problem. I wore them for the whole of the spine basically when I did that, and they didn't give me any issues with blisters really. It's the odd little blister, but nothing compared to sort of the summer before when my feet were destroyed. So swapped into them. I got out my stuff for the night, got my head torches ready, sort of in a pocket ready so they could come out, even though I'd carried them anyway, because um, you've got to carry those bits of equipment for the whole thing. Um, Grabbed another layer, a thicker layer. So I've got a coat with me as well as my waterproof jacket. And then as I set off, I had a load of food at settle, got my poles out of my bag, and I knew that I'd sort of be using them. So I knew that things would sort of slow down during the night. So that's definitely what happened. So as it sort of went dark and started to go cold, and then eventually it got really cold. So I managed to go through to probably like sort of about midnight, 1 in the morning, something like that, with just a long sleeve um, t-shirt and t-shirt over the short sleeve t-shirt over the top, and gloves and a beanie. But then as I got onto, there's a section on the Cam High Road, which obviously joins the Pennine Way, and you go up the majority of the Cam Road to the top, the brow of the hill. And once I got started to climb the Cam High Road, I realised just how cold it was. So fortunately, there's a water stop. So I felt sorry for, can't remember his name, but I felt sorry for the guy from Ranger Ultras who was at the top of the Cam High Road. He looked like he was togged up. And he said it was probably about -4, something like that, maybe more with the wind chill. So that I 100% agreed with that. And I was so glad that I'd got two pairs of gloves with me. So I'd taken with me, even though it sort of said on the kit list, mandatory kit, light gloves. I decided to take light gloves and my thicker thermal Montane gloves. And that was the right choice because basically my hands got so cold from the thin gloves that I was like, I'm gonna have to swap over. And then my hands were still cold with the thermal Montane ones that I thought, well, I've got two pairs of gloves, I'll just double them up. So got the thin ones on and then the thicker ones over the top, and then everything was good. So things were looking good. It was sort of the middle of the night, probably like 2 o'clock in the morning, something 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning. Dropped off the top of the Cam High Road, not concentrating on what I was doing, and I rolled my ankle, didn't I? So, and it was a bad one as well. So it hurt so much that I was instantly sick. So I don't know if you've ever rolled your ankle before and you get that kind of like bit of a sick feeling, or you just sort of go into a bit of shock. And I think the combination of it being the middle of the night, I was tired from running, I'm not sure how far I'd gone by that point, probably like 60 or 70 miles, something like that. 60 miles, 60 odd miles, I think it was. Um, and my body's reaction was just, right, we need to be sick. We need to get all this food out that you've just eaten. So I stood there and a few choice words came out of my mouth with the pain of rolling my ankle. Um, and then my body was just like, right, you're gonna be sick. So I was sick, and I thought, that's okay, I'm all right. I don't feel sick. It was just obviously just like a bit of a reaction. And I stood there and I thought, no, I'm going to be sick again. So I was sick again. And then basically, I think I was sick 4 times. And by this point, I'd sort of been stood, my foot absolutely killing, thinking, what do I do? Do I go back to the water stop and sort of quit the race, or do I just sort of hobble on down this hill and just sort of hope that the terrain gets a bit smoother and it won't hurt my foot? So I decided to reluctantly to just sort of carry on and see how I felt. And I thought, worst case scenario, I can get down to civilization and I'll compress my tracker and the SOS call can go out. And I think that taking a few painkillers, having a bit of food, slowing down, sort of did the trick. And then fortunately, it seemed like the terrain became more grassy after that. So rather than it being sort of hard tarmac or sort of broken trail, it sort of smoothed out into nice sort of rolling, grassy sort of terrain. And there was no issues with my foot sort of turning and it seemed to sort of probably just sort of seized up with when it swelled, it seized up a little bit, and just thought I've done this before. I've ran on a twisted ankle. I can do it again. So basically, that's what I did. Carried on, but unfortunately, I then rolled it another 2 times during the rest of the race. I wasn't sick the other 2 times, but basically it slowed me down. So I'd kind of had hopes that I'd sort of recoup myself and then possibly try and catch Michael. But then after I rolled my ankle the first time, I could just see that he just moved further and further away from me. Even though himself, he had trouble. He told me afterwards that he kicked a giant boulder, and it hurt so much that he was taking painkillers as well, and it slowed him down. So I think everybody obviously slows down in the night, but I slowed down massively. So my goal of being around 24 hours was kind of out of the question at this point, and I just had to just hobble along. And while it was sort of the trails were flat enough to run on, or hilly enough to sort of hike up, that was fine. But it was when you kind of running across a field and there's a bit of a slope on the field, and your foot is just turning slightly. Just it was, yeah. So I must admit that I probably took my limit of paracetamol over a few hours. So I was probably pushing the limit of how many I could actually take. But we got to the finish. There was a few nav errors, and I think that that combined with a few course changes meant that what I thought was going to be 83 or 84 miles converted from the kilometers, actually I ended up running nearly 91 miles. So, I could have carried on and done a 100 miler. So more or less ran a 100 miler in 26 hours and change, with a rolled ankle from about 70 miles, 60 miles, 70 miles. So in the end, I was quite pleased with second place. I hadn't gone there with any intentions of, obviously, if there'd been the opportunity to win the race, I'd have gone for it. But knowing my fitness at that point and knowing that I wasn't probably ready for a very long race like that, then I was quite pleased with second place. So all in all, it turned out okay. So, I'm writing a race report, race review for Run Ultra for Kate Allen at Run Ultra, and that will come out. But I can't recommend this race enough. So if you're, I know I've spoke about this before, but if you're sort of curious about doing spine races, wanting to do stuff on the Pennine Way, then this is kind of like a really good way of getting yourself into that mindset. So although the train isn't exactly the same, there are sections that you know, most of it, I felt like I was just on a spine race, just without the bogs. The sort of climbing is very similar. There's lots of steep climbs and descents, trails that you can use. There was a lot more sort of nice runnable grassy sections and runnable trail sections on that. So if you are interested in doing like a long Pennine adventure, if you are sort of wanting to do a spine race of any sort of description, then I would recommend doing one of the Ranger Ultras, Pennine Bridle Way, 137 or 270s as a way to sort of get yourself into, how you sort of look after yourself because they are very, very similar in the fact that you've got to be self-sufficient, you've got to look after yourself. Water and checkpoints aren't very close together at all. I think the distances were sort of like 17, 19 miles between water stops and checkpoints. So you have a good few, plenty of hours, so probably sort of like 4 or 5 hours, maybe 6 hours at a time where you're on your own, basically. So you've got to learn these sort of self-sufficient ways of looking after yourself and getting water where you can, and making the most of carrying the kit that you need and stuff. So for anyone sort of wanting to do a big race, sort of self-sufficient, then I definitely recommend it. And that's not because I'm mates with Stu. It's just, yeah, it's the races that Rangers Ultras put on. Yeah, they're good. So get yourself signed up for next year, and we're gonna have a word with Stu. Hopefully, see if Home Trails can get involved with the race next year. So you never know, you might see as a sponsor in the race. Maybe I'll have a word with Stu. So you heard it here first. So I better have a word with Stu about that. So thanks for listening, everyone. I appreciate that this isn't you're used to hearing an interview, so you're not always used to just hearing me babble on my own about the news, ultra news, and my own racing. So I appreciate you listening. If you've listened to this far, then you are a die-hard listener, and I appreciate everybody. So send me a message if you like the podcast, if you want me to do another solo one, or if you want to tell me to never do a solo one ever again, then feel free to get in touch. Um, so next week there might be a delay on an episode, but we're gonna have Fiona Horsfield from Northern Traverse. We may possibly have either Ian Keith or Scott Jenkins coming on to talk about the Arizona Monster 300. So look forward to seeing you guys soon. So thanks for listening, everyone. Bye 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 bye.